thank everyone for being here today. One of my goals as SCORE president this year was to have more direct involvement between SCORE and our broker and manager members. This is a third broker meeting in our series, and today we're very fortunate to have Vice President and Chief Economist for CAR, Jordan Levine. Jordan helps to see all housing market research at CAR, including market statistics, survey research, industry trends, and policy analysis for CAR's legislative and governmental affairs efforts. And Jordan will be presenting us or providing with us an economic look as to how 2021 is shaping up and what we could expect in 2022 and what may have in store for us. We do have the slide deck will be provided. I think Jody is going to have the link pinned in the chat, so you'll be able to download all these slides, so you don't need to worry about copying everything while he's talking. Just listen. He's got a lot of great information. Put any questions that you have in the Q&A, and we'll address those after Jordan's presentation. After Jordan's presentation, our Q&A, we're going to have our Government Affairs Director, Tim Beaubien, provide us with some important updates on SB 9, SB 10, COPA, and Opportunity Housing. And finally, we'll have our SCORE CEO, Neil Collins, provide additional updates on SCORE. So that being said, thank you everyone for being here. And Jordan, I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Doug. I appreciate the invite, and thanks to Neil for reaching out as well. I'm going to share my slides and screen so that we can all look at that instead of my face. It'll be less traumatic for everyone and hopefully more informative. I felt like the best place to start was to do what Leslie always did, and that was what she called a cadence of accountability. She obviously has in addition to her many other strengths, a much better vocabulary than me. But I think the spirit of what she meant was to let you know what kind of stock you should put in all the stuff I'm about to tell you by letting you know how we performed last year. And if you go back to the end of September, early October, when we released that 2021 forecast, our expectations were that sales would continue to go up by a little bit, about 3.3%, and that prices as well would also go up a little bit, 1.3% to around $650,000 this year. Part of that decline or that deceleration in prices was because we were expecting the market to normalize. If you go back to where we were at the end of September last year, we were coming down off a pretty significant spike in the COVID numbers. Things were looking like they were on the mend. And of course, the second that I released that forecast in partnership with Leslie on her final one last year, was pretty much dead on arrival, because we walked out of Reimagine, the virtual conference last year, and immediately saw a surge to unprecedented levels in the pandemic, right? We saw a ramp that started early November, even late October, and stayed to levels that were even higher than what we saw last summer, right up through the end of January. And so right off the bat, what it meant was that 2020 actually came in incredibly strong, much stronger than we initially expected. In fact, we ended the year with about 20,000 more home sales than we expected to have for all of 2021, right? We had an incredible surge in demand, and that's one of the things that we've seen pretty consistently through this crisis, is that as the public health situation deteriorates, what Joel Singer called the value of home, our CEO, really increases, right? There's a renewed passion for home ownership out there as the kind of economic situation got worse. And so right off the bat, we were coming in on a much stronger tailwind. In fact, we got up to a 660,000 price level on an annual basis, because we were setting all-time highs during that final quarter of the year when the public health situation was just really dire. And so we actually ended with more sales than we had even in 2019, with prices that actually ended up going up by double digits last year. And so again, coming in on an incredible tailwind. And that's why if you look at our projection of where we think we're going to end 2021, we're looking at a year that was, much, much better than what we initially anticipated. We're going to have sales that are about twice as fast as what we originally expected, about 7%, 6.8% increase this year instead of the 3.3% that we originally expected. But the big variance is on prices, right? Because let me back that up. Our price projection is that we're going to get close to 800,000 at which would be a 20% increase from where we were in 2020. So with all that being said, I give myself about a C- on that. We had the direction right, sales going up, prices going up, but where we missed the boat was just the huge surge in COVID and how that reinvigorated housing and drove a much stronger increase in not only sales but also prices, because that was also met with a retrenchment in inventory. So we were pointing you in the right direction, but I'll admit that we did not see those COVID numbers coming. And so when we think about kind of what we can expect going into 2022, I think when you ask me what is the forecast, I think you're really asking several questions kind of all baked in there. One of which is, what's happening in that macroeconomic environment? Is that broader tide rising? And despite the fact that we do see greater sources of uncertainty out there, not just with COVID, but there's also, energy stuff, stock market that's been a little bit all over the map. Most of the uncertainty, though, is largely global at this point in time. What's going on with China's housing market? What's going on with Evergrande, et cetera? Despite those, what I would call kind of wild cards, we're relatively optimistic about the economy. We see that jobs will continue to come back. Incomes, after we kind of wash through the effects of that government stimulus, will start to rise again. That will lead to increases in spending and even a lot of those life events that really matter for us when it comes to housing demand, right? Getting married, having babies, getting kicked out of your mom's basement, what have you. Those are all kind of predicated on having a growing economy. You're also asking me how housing itself is going to do, right? Will we continue to outperform the rest of the economy because we've been the kind of bright spot in a relatively dour, economic context, right? And there too, I think that we'll see sales that remain at a relatively healthy level, prices that continue to go up, a market that's still pretty competitive. But I think to really understand what's going to happen in housing next year, we have to talk a little bit about the changes that are going to be a little bit more persistent and the areas where we're already starting to see signs of things going back, not to normal, but maybe looking a little bit closer to what they looked like pre-crisis as opposed to what they looked like last March, April, and May. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that as these kind of cyclical issues start to fall into the background, that we still have a lot of what I would call pre-existing conditions, largely, in terms of housing supply, which will continue to prevent us from kind of maintaining those 15-year highs that we got to start 2021. And of course, when it's all said and done, it's not just the kind of broader context, it's what it all means for us as individual real estate practitioners, right? What do we go out there and advise our agents to do as real estate brokers, right? And there, I think that it's still very much a kind of nose to the grindstone, foot on the accelerator type of environment, because as we've seen, and I'll show some statistics on the kind of industry side, that even as we got to 15-year highs in transactions last year, that rising tide, has only lifted some boats. And I think that that's why it's still, you want to make sure that those agents are out there avoiding the temptation to look at this good economic news and kind of throw their own business in autopilot, because it's still very much a kind of market share driven game at this particular point in time. And so, yes, the cyclical issues are fading. No, you don't want to kind of pop the champagne and pat yourself on the back for having made it, because those structural issues, I think, are going to start to play a much bigger role going forward in the market when it comes to the number of transactions that are out there, frankly, and all of the kind of consequent effects. But let's talk about that rising tide, right? Because that's kind of step zero for the housing market. You want that tide to be rising. And ultimately, I think that from that standpoint, surf's up, right? We have reasons to be optimistic about the next couple months. The first thing to point out is how good the public health numbers are looking, right? You can see that we've had real significant improvements after a pretty significant surge during the summer again this year. But those numbers have been improving on a consistent basis for the last 6 to 8 weeks. The reason why I kind of keep this one as a wild card in the mix is because we're pretty much at the exact same point in time as we were last year when I made my forecast, which I've highlighted for you here in gray. Things were on the up and up then as well, and then things got really bad and it reinvigorated housing. I don't think that this is something that's going to necessarily upset our forecast. I just think that if, and we're clearly in a much different environment, number of people that have gotten shots, et cetera, et cetera. But if these numbers, reverse course, then it could mean that you have even more housing demand, less housing supply, more growth in prices. But for now, seems like we've got a lid on the public health side of this thing. And that really kind of matters when it comes to the broader economy, right? Because you can see here that in the kind of initial onset of the crisis, we had the most rapid deterioration in the macroeconomic environment that's ever been recorded between February and April of last year. We lost 2.7 million non-farm jobs, right? And again, that's the quickest retrenchment we've ever seen. But as we got our arms wrapped around kind of social distancing, we certainly didn't open the economy by any means early on, but we did start to understand, masking and protocols, et cetera, and gradually we're able to loosen up a little bit. And that has led to, but for that kind of huge surge in COVID cases that I showed you back in last winter, pretty consistent improvement in labor markets. In fact, through August, and we don't have the September data until Friday, but through August, we had already added back 1.7 of the 2.7 million jobs that we lost. So we're still about 1 million jobs below that pre-crisis peak, and we probably still need another 400 or so thousand jobs on top of that to get us back, not just to where we were, but back to those long run trend lines where we should have been, but for the effects of this crisis. But when it's all said and done, that really means that we're basically about 55-60% of the way towards full economic recovery and moving pretty consistently in the right direction. When you look at the distribution of those 2.7 million jobs that we lost last year, broken out by category, the strength of the housing market really starts to make a lot of sense. Usually housing goes the same way as the broader economy. And I talked about how that macroeconomic tide is step zero for a housing forecast. But in this case, what we saw was that the effects of this crisis disproportionately affected folks at the low end of the income spectrum. And so these are those 2.7 million jobs we lost, broken out by industry. And the red stuff are our 4 lowest paying industries in the state, and the green industries are our 4 highest paying industries. And what you can see again is that the brunt of this crisis was disproportionately borne by folks in those kind of high contact, face-to-face, non-remotable sectors like leisure and hospitality, our bars, our restaurants, our hotels, right? Our retail establishments, other services, which is kind of all of our personal care, whether it's dry cleaners, barbers, hair, and nail salons and dry cleaners and stuff like that. And of course, those administrative jobs that we just use across every single industry. That's where the vast majority of all of the job losses came from versus, sectors like professional, scientific, technical, which is where spreadsheet nerds like me used to work before I came to CAR, and things like consulting companies, places like tech companies, right? Information is our internet and software publishers, right? Financial activities and management, both of which are self-explanatory. We're much more insulated from the effects of this crisis. And so in some cases, actually, those folks at the high end were doing even better than ever financially. They both were able to work remotely. They had a lot of flexibility to not come into the office. In many cases, their companies were doing better than ever, whether it was measured by stock prices, IPOs, hiring, et cetera. And if you think about the structure of California's housing market pre-crisis, those relatively unaffected industries were really the sectors that were sourcing all of the home buyers out of California, right? Because of affordability, housing supply, et cetera, being what it was, you had to be in those high income categories in the first place. And those, lo and behold, were the folks that were doing, better than everybody else, or at least punching above their weight economically. And so you kind of had this perfect storm on top of the fact that there was this renewed passion for home ownership. So it really did kind of have this kind of trifecta effect, with the relative economic advantage, the renewed passion for home ownership, and now these folks were able to work remotely, and it really opened a lot of doors. And you can see the same thing in terms of the recovery, right? That not just were those low wage sectors the ones that were hit hardest in terms of job losses, they're also the ones that still have the longest way to go in terms of full recovery. Whereas, again, those high wage sectors are either at or above pre-crisis levels already. And I think from that standpoint, it really does start to explain why housing had such a counter-cyclical reaction to the effect of this crisis, because again, of that trifecta for housing demand. And of course, we can't overstate the impact of 2.6% mortgage rates, right? You throw that in with that trifecta for housing demand, and it really did motivate a lot of first-time buyers and repeat buyers to get into the market. We've seen rates go up a little bit over the course of the last couple of weeks. In fact, we've gone up above 3% in 2 out of the last 3 weeks for the first time in a while. But I still always like to remind folks that I'm the son of a guy who, back in 1980s was dragging me to his kind of barbecues and cocktail parties with his buddies, bragging about his 12.5% mortgage rate. And I think when you look at rates through this kind of 50-year long plus, lens, that rates are still very, very favorable. Outside of the 2.6% rates that we saw earlier this year, rates are essentially as attractive as they've ever been. And so I still think that, interest rates are going to be a tailwind. I actually think the prospect of higher rates in the future is probably second best to lowest rates of all time in terms of motivating buyers and kind of creating that sense of urgency. And so that really did kind of show itself in the actual marketplace. And if you just go back to the end of December, you can see what a strong tailwind we were coming into 2021 on. We actually hit a 15-year high of almost 510,000 units last year, and actually ended 3.5% above 2019 levels in terms of overall transactions, which means that incredibly, despite all the lost ground and missed transactions during March, April, and May of last year, when we were essentially in lockdown, we more than made up for that lost ground during the second half of the year, clawing all of those losses back and then some to again end the year up 3.5%, even as prices set what at that time were all-time highs of almost 720,000 and an all-time low level of inventory of just 1.3 months of supply. So we saw that kind of perfect storm borne out in terms of the actual market statistics, but it did have a kind of initial impact, I would call it, on the kind of 5 W's of housing demand, because the state as a whole ended 2020 up 3.5% from 2019. But there was actually 20 cities last year that ended up at least 40% compared to 2019. Again, more than making up for any lost ground during the middle part of the year. And if you actually categorize those 20 cities, I would argue that they generally fell into 2 types of flavors, right? You either had your very high cost, high income markets, your Malibus, your Montecitos in Santa Barbara, your Tiburons, Rancho Santa Fe down in San Diego County, or the markets that don't necessarily boast a lot of jobs, but offer a high quality of life, recreation, resort markets, et cetera. And that is the kind of common theme across these green ones, whether we're talking about Big Bear, Lake Arrowhead, Tahoe, Arnold, right? Or, places like Indian Wells, the Palm Springs area, the kind of Sierra Nevada foothills, Rancho, Murrieta, Tehachapi, Truckee, et cetera. And so I would say that we saw kind of motivated buyer population enabled by remote work and increased flexibility to kind of opportunistically take advantage of the ability to get their foot on the property ladder by going to some of these markets that either were too far for them when they were commuting to the office every day, or just kind of for whatever other reason, because they had that flexibility, needed space, and what have you. You see the same kind of story played out when you look at it not by geography, but instead by product type, right? Because folks went from buying, basically the exact same size house, right? And for the last 3 years before this crisis, the median size of a home, the median square footage of a home that was closed in California stayed plus or minus 1,740 square feet, like plus or minus 2%, around about 1,740 square feet. But you could see that almost immediately in the onset of the crisis, that number went up to about 1,830 square feet after years of being almost constant by economic standards and statistical standards, right? That jumped up by about 100 square feet roughly, which to my mind equates to about the size of a home office / classroom / gym / games room, what have you. And you see the same kind of story if you look at it by single family versus condo, right? That when people were leaving to these outlying areas in Nevada and Big Bear and Tahoe and stuff like that, when they were buying bigger homes, when single family was shrinking by 30 and 40%, you had condos shrinking by 40 and 60%. And so all of these things kind of help us triangulate on the fact that the shape of buyer demand was impacted, at least initially, by the nature of this crisis. And so we did see, a lot of folks motivated to finally get their foot on the property ladder, these long-term renters, right? And actually last year we hit a 10-year high. This year, the percentage of first-time buyers in the marketplace came down a little bit, but still at basically 9-year highs outside of what we saw last year. And so, we did have a lot of these folks, whether it was because of flexibility, the need for space, the fact that homes are more important to us than ever before, the 2.6% mortgage rates are probably realistically a little bit of all of the above. You did have these folks finally make that plunge into home ownership, but they tended to be the relatively affluent first-time buyers. And I think that if you look at these housing numbers through the lens of the kind of that relative economic advantage that we just discussed in terms of the jobs data, the insulation from the effects of the crisis, you see that a lot of those first-time buyers were those relatively affluent long-term renters. About a third of the market for the last 2 years running, a third of just those first-time buyers, mind you, came in with at least 20% down payment. So again, the high income earners, the folks with potentially baby boomer parents that had, lots of home equity that they could help out with on down payments. It wasn't the kind of 0% down 5/1 option arm, scrap my way into home ownership type of first time buyer, which is good from the standpoint of systemic risk. Although it's, we aren't seeing the kind of surge in home ownership rate potential, but I do think this kind of underscores how the value of home, right, that renewed passion for home ownership played itself out in terms of the market. You could see the same thing if you look at it not in terms of down payment, but instead in terms of just income, right? Because the typical first-time buyer coming in California statewide now has incomes well in excess of 6 figures, right? And that's even higher for those repeat buyers. And I know these are probably even laughably low from the standpoint of Santa Clara and the kind of incomes that first-time buyers need to get into a market like ours. Again, making sense through the lens of the kind of nerdy economic data is the fact that it wasn't just the affluent first-time buyer / long-term renters getting into the market. You also had a lot of these folks with properties that were appreciating at a rapid clip with stock portfolios, which, in addition to the tech companies doing so well, stock prices have done, incredible relative to the kind of Main Street economy. And that I think explains why you're also seeing a lot of demand from the kind of vacation second home market of folks who want to buy stuff to put on Airbnb and use part of the time. And those numbers also grew this year as a percentage of total transactions. And I think that you see the same kind of a story when you look at the housing market broken out by price segment, right? Because 2 million and up has outperformed the rest of the market for the entirety of the recovery. In fact, even as the kind of year-to-year performance of the state as a whole has now gone negative for the last 2 months in a row, we still had the 2 million and up segment growing by about 40%, even after growing by 70% at this time last year. And so just, again, top end with those high wage earners, really punching above its weight in terms of the overall housing market. In fact, we sell more homes over $1 million now than we sell homes under 500,000. And it wasn't that long ago when 500,000 was where almost all of the action was in California, right? So again, just a testament to not just the renewed passion for home ownership, but how, folks at the top end of the income spectrum in particular seem to have what is an insatiable amount of demand. And so, that was where we were last year with a lot of that opportunistic out migration, top end of the market doing really well, renewed passion for home ownership. This year, we are starting to see signs of what I would call normalizing. There's no word for something that's not normal anymore, and there is going to be no normal, but and I think that some markets will continue to be more normal than others, and I think that an Animal Farm reference is probably appropriate to throw some Orwell in. But when you look at the markets broken down by price segment, the high price markets are the ones that are still growing fast enough, right? This is year-to-date growth in transactions on the bottom mapped against the price, and each dot represents one of our 500 to 600 cities here in California. And you can see that the higher priced markets are the ones generally with the faster growth. In fact, if you look at growth through August, and I didn't get a chance to update this since our new numbers came out yesterday, for September, I did update the local data though, but the statewide stuff, no. But if you just look through August, right, that 70% of the top 75 fastest growing cities that I'm showing you here on the left-hand side are markets with a median price of at least $1 million. 1 out of 4 of these top 75 fastest growing cities are markets with a median price of at least $2 million. So again, I think that will continue to, be a theme going forward into 2022. Those high income earners are still doing better. Those kind of tech enabled, businesses continue to punch above their weight in terms of the rest of the broader economy. But if you actually look at the geographic distribution, a lot of those high cost markets are actually high cost markets right in the heart of California's employment centers. And so if you look at it just at a kind of Northern California generally perspective, right? And this is that same growth in transactions mapped out on a map. The green stuff are cities with at least 30% growth. The yellowish green is 10 to 30%. The red stuff are markets that are shrinking. Look where all the green is on this map, right? It's on the peninsula. It's in Santa Clara County, frankly. It's in the East Bay, right? It's not all clustered north of Sacramento or out in the Sierra Nevada foothills, right? You do see some growth in places like Mariposa and things like that, but most of the demand is growing where the demand for homes in California has always been, and that's where most of the jobs are still, actually located. I know nobody in this room cares about this, but you see the same kind of a story playing itself out in Southern California as well. Everybody isn't moving to Big Bear. All of the housing demand isn't happening in Palm Springs. Yes, those markets are growing. Yes, Big Bear is still growing, right? Joshua Tree is still growing, but where's most of the growth happening, right? It's again along those traditional employment corridors. And so even as we probably will see increased incentive as a result of remote work and flexibility and stuff like that drive growth in some of these outlying markets, we're also seeing real honest to goodness growth, the majority of the growth happening in California's core. In fact, if you just look at it from a much broader perspective, while the state as a whole was up 20% through the first 8 months of the year, The Bay Area, the Central Coast, and Southern California were up even more than that, right? It's actually the outperformance is happening in our kind of least affordable, least available housing markets, which I think is just a testament to the fact that demand, although it's changed a bit, hasn't really changed completely, right? It still is looking a lot more like it did before the crisis. Of course, all of those things and trends are kind of music to the ears of the folks in this room. So this is through September, Santa Clara County, transactions, and what you can see both in terms of growth of sales. And I probably opportunistically tried to cram too much data in here, but I don't know if you could see my mouse or not, but in terms of sales growth, right, you could still see that every single part of the county is up by double digits. We're talking about, the kind of lowest performing market in the county is Morgan Hill, which is only up 12% from where it was this time last year. Whereas, some of the kind of higher cost markets, Sunnyvale, Los Gatos, Saratoga are up, 50, 60, 70%. This is cumulative through the first 9 months of the year compared to the first 9 months of last year. So this isn't just a kind of one-off thing. And you see that the competitiveness numbers are still just incredibly competitive. So even as we see things kind of normalizing, and you'll see in a second that we're not hanging on to those 15-year highs for transaction volumes, don't let anybody tell you this is a particularly cool market, right? Because it's only in places like Los Altos Hills with a median price of 6.1 million where you see, the days on market going up above 2 weeks, right? So just still incredibly competitive. Still the vast majority of transactions closing above list price at this particular point in time, even in markets with $6 million median prices, right? And actually, what's interesting is that you don't see the top end of the market kind of doing as well as what I showed you in that overall chart for the state as a whole, because keep in mind that the prices in Santa Clara, Campbell, Mountain View, Sunnyvale, all the way up to Saratoga in that 3.2 million range, that's kind of the middle of the road for Santa Clara. That's the extreme high end from the perspective of anywhere else pretty much in the state, except for other parts of California. So in general, you do see that those higher price markets, generally outperforming, right? You got Sunnyvale doing a lot better than Gilroy, and that is, generally true across the county. That look, we're seeing these markets grow by double digits across the board. It's just that those higher priced markets are in particular doing really well. And so we are seeing, not we're not going back to normal, but it's normal or it's kind of normal ish, right? It's more normal than what we saw last year. Part of that is, that the kind of buyer demand, that extreme appetite for housing has been eroded by 18 months of extreme market competition, right? That after being outbid, putting in offers, seeing people offer more money, put down bigger down payments, willing to pay cash, willing to waive contingencies, not have kind of, sell contingencies on your sell side, right? They don't care if I sell my old house or not, I'll worry about that later, means that we did see a lot of buyer fatigue setting in, right? That the percentage of people who thought it was a good time to buy was basically cut in half over the last year. That kind of chronic inventory constraint eventually takes a toll on the psychology of buyers out there. The good news is that as the market has started to normalize a bit, we've come up a tiny bit from all-time lows. So these are our kind of home buyer sentiment questions. We do a survey of about 1,000 consumers. 2 of the questions we ask every month is just, is it a good time to buy? And is it a good time to sell? If you look on the left-hand side, buyers aren't particularly bullish on housing right now, but it has risen if you really squint at that over the course of the last 2 months. So just a little bit of normalization, a little bit more inventory, brings buyers back into the game. Sellers are still pretty optimistic there, but it has taken its toll in terms of buyer demand, because we had 21 weeks in a row now, you can see here, where mortgage applications are in the red, right? And that unfortunately has done a pretty good job of predicting our weekly growth number for California closed transactions, which have also pretty much fallen suit. In fact, we're holding on a little bit better than the overall mortgage applications number. So California still kind of continues to outperform the broader national environment, but buyers have been affected by this kind of hyper competitive market. And that is showing up not just in the mortgage applications, but in our pending sales numbers as well, which have also been in decline now for the last 4 months in a row. So yes, we are seeing things go back to normal. And unfortunately, that means probably transaction levels that are closer to 400,000 than they are to 500,000. The good news is that we don't expect a further retrenchment from here. We're actually hanging on about 5 to 7% above pre-crisis levels. And we do think that with that structural shift in housing demand that we'll be able to maintain higher levels of transactions by the standards of kind of the last decade outside of what we saw last year. But it's not just sales that are going back to normal, right? That are going back to that kind of 430,000 unit pace. We're actually starting to see a few more listings hit the market. In fact, we haven't seen that normal kind of decline, that seasonal decline in actives yet. September actually had a pretty good month in terms of overall active inventory. We're still hugely depressed relative to even the standards of 2018 and 19, which were, I don't know if we can even remember back that far, years seem like decades now, but 2018 and 19 weren't particularly great years for housing inventory, and we're still running about half those levels. But if you look at the right-hand side of this chart, inventory has moved in the right direction, and we are optimistic that that will hopefully improve as we move forward as well. The market's also not quite as competitive as it was, right? And so again, I think we can do ourselves a service by talking some buyers back into the market, particularly while we still have a window of opportunity on rates, because, no, the market's not cool by any stretch, right? We still had 62% of transactions in September close above list price, but we didn't have 75% of transactions close above list price the way that we did, 4 or 5 months ago. Same thing in terms of median time on market, right? That it's still taken less than 2 weeks for homes to go pending once they hit the MLS on average, right? But it's no longer taking less than 1 week, right? And so I think that, again, for those buyers who may have gotten discouraged, we can kind of do some talking of them back into the marketplace. You even see it in terms of home prices, right? That yes, we're still in a kind of excess demand type of environment, but I kind of joked on the last slide that we're just not in that kind of sizzling, white hot, bubbling over the side kind of environment. It's just normal, plain old, boring, red hot, which is why, even though we're still close to all-time high prices in excess of 800 grand, that growth in prices has cooled to 13.5% from more than 35% this summer, right? So we are seeing signs that although there was that kind of coronavirus driven shift in the shape of demand, that we have gone back and normalized a little bit. It's not going to go back all the way though. And we see that the size of homes that people are buying are a lot stickier than the geographic data that I showed you, right? So I showed you how in 2021, a lot of the transactions came back to the peninsula, came back to Santa Clara County and the East Bay, but we haven't seen the size of the home start to decline in a meaningful way yet. Folks are coming back to the core, but they're looking for bigger homes, right? The other thing is that I think that even as we're seeing more of the growth happen in the core, we also can't lie to ourselves about the fact that this crisis has accelerated some of our underlying pre-existing conditions. And if you look at this yellow stuff, this is the percentage of home sellers who sold their home and then left California completely. That's where they bought their next property. And this is from our 2021 annual housing market survey. We've been doing this survey for about 30 years, but asking these specific questions for about 16. That number went up in 2021, and it went up at a faster rate, right? So not only, this is a long-standing trend. More sellers have been leaving California pretty much since prices started to rebound again at the end of the last recession. but they went up faster in 2021, right? The gap between 2020 and 2021 was bigger than it normally is. This is an acceleration in out migration from California. People do have more flexibility, right? They do want home ownership and they don't have to go to the office. And some folks were able to kind of make that leap to places like Texas, Nevada, Arizona, Washington, Idaho, where they now hate our guts, et cetera. And you see that same kind of a trend when you look domestically as well, right? The blue line, which I'm showing you on the left-hand axis here, that's the percentage of sellers that sold and then bought another home in the same county where they already lived, right? And that number also accelerated, right? That for the first time since we've been doing the survey, had less than a third of sellers who repurchased in their home county. So you did have still a lot of folks who moved to El Dorado County, moved to Tahoe and Big Bear, et cetera. And so, the thing that I'm trying to point out is that both of these things are true. And it's probably more urgent than ever that we get serious about our structural problems, because even though we don't have 2021 data yet, the Department of Finance numbers corroborate what we saw in our housing market survey, right? Because we had 261,000 people last year on net. That's even after subtracting all the people who moved into California from other states. 261,000 people left the state. And we had, for the first time in recorded history, California's population actually shrunk, right? Part of that's because we had a lot of people die last year, but part of it also is because we had folks pick up and move, and an acceleration of those kind of long-standing trends. And of course, I would also be remiss if I didn't point out that it's because we don't build enough, right? Even with a projected 20% increase in new construction this year, we're still going to fall 60,000 units short of where the state says we need to be, just to tread water on housing affordability, right? 180,000 is the number the state says we need, just to kind of make that kind of metaphorical credit card payment, if you will, right? Forget about bringing down the credit card balance that we've built up by never achieving that level of construction except 5 times in the last 35 years. 180 is what we need just to make the monthly interest payment, right? And so, again, you don't have to look much farther than that to explain why there's not a lot of housing out there to sell, but also B, why the homes that we do have don't end up showing up on the MLS, right? And we see now, again, in our 2021 annual housing market survey, people are living in their homes twice as long as they used to, right? We kind of fixed some of those incentives that kept people in their homes with Prop 19 and kind of fixing that with the tax portability issue, but folks still face capital gains on these properties, particularly in markets like Santa Clara, where you have a lot of home equity that's accrued over the last couple of decades. But the biggest thing is, where are folks going to go, right? Even if they're willing to kind of take the capital gains hit on the chin, where do you move to, right? And you're kind of in a situation where you're going to sell high and buy even higher if you can find something to buy at all. And that's why in some ways, people are holding on to these homes for dear life, right? And you see that also affecting the market. And so that's really the kind of double whammy when it comes to housing supply, that not only is there just not enough homes out there, the homes that we have are no longer changing hands. And that's why even in the second quarter, when we had the lowest interest rates of all time that my dad would have killed for back in the 80s. In fact, I wish my dad was still around to be able to take advantage of these low rates right now. Even in that low rate environment, we still had housing affordability that was on the decline, that the increase in prices was more than canceling out the benefits of lower rates. And now we're entering a period where rates will probably start to go up. And so we're going to have rising prices and rising rates. And again, that will be the kind of 1-2 punch for affordability, because even as, my dad would have killed for the rates that we have today, the thing my dad didn't have back in the 80s was $830,000 median home prices, right? And so even at 3% small changes in rates at those high prices do have pocketbook impacts for buyers. And that's why we don't have we were already coming into this crisis with a 10 percentage point gap in home ownership with the rest of the United States, with it being particularly grim in those segments of the demographic that are probably going to be the biggest source of potential home buyers moving forward. And again, you don't have to look much farther than that lack of construction to explain these vacancy rates, the low levels of inventory, the record prices, the fact that we have so many folks living rent burdened or in overcrowded housing or both, and why we're dead last in terms of overall poverty once you account for the cost of housing, right? And so, I again think that it's more incumbent on us than ever to address this longstanding supply issue, particularly because we're no longer in that crisis management mode, right? We're not triaging a coronavirus pandemic, and now folks have that flexibility. So it's time to get really serious, because those structural issues, impact the market, but they also impact our business as real estate professionals, right? And that's why, even though we're forecasting good news on the kind of rising tide and even on the broader housing market, that as brokers, we need to have our agents really keep their nose to the grindstone, because, again, we're a state that's gone from 25 million people in the mid 80s to about 40 million people today. We have about twice as many realtors as we used to have back then, right? But we basically sell the same number of homes that we did when we had half as many realtors and 15 million fewer people in this state. And again, the cause and effect there is pretty clear, that it's associated with the fact that we build about a third as much as we used to build back then. And that's why, even in a market where we hit 15-year highs in terms of transactions last year, what we saw was that rising tide really only lifted some boats. The market share of the top 20% of agents out there increased over the last couple of years, right? That those high producing agents did even better than ever in the midst of this crisis. In fact, if you look at mean incomes, right, you add up all the commissions and you divide it by the number of realtors, that number went up by 16%, right? That the overall volume and commissions went up by much more than the overall base of membership. But if you look at the income for the median member out there, that number actually went down by almost 17%, even in the midst of all-time high prices and transaction volumes that were at 15-year highs. And so, that's why, even as we're kind of optimistic about the broader economy, and you can see here that we do think the recovery will continue, that GDP will expand by 4% next year, that will add another 3% to our non-farm payrolls, that unemployment will continue to come down, and that inflation will actually be relatively tame in the kind of 3% range. And actually, California is forecast to do even better than that. We're going to expand our non-farm payrolls by almost 5% and have an even better improvement in unemployment. We might even see population growth get back on track. But even with that kind of rising tide economic forecast, we still have transactions that are going to average about 420,000 units on an annualized basis, which will be a 5% decline from where we are going to be this year, right? That we're still going to see a lot of demand out there, but we're going to go back to having this affordability housing supply challenge that's going to prevent us from hanging on to those 15-year highs that we started 2021 with. Of course, it's still going to be an excess demand environment. That's why we do have prices continuing to go up by 5% to about $835,000, even as the market transitions from the top end so heavy to hopefully eventually the bottom end of the market again. And so, again, even as things are improving, the good news is that, that economic tide is rising. We have a lid on the COVID numbers. Buyer demand is probably more ferocious than ever before in terms of that passion for home ownership. And even as we've seen things normalize, sellers are still having a fairly good time of it. Rates are still pretty low. And so sales are going to stay pretty solid by pre-crisis standards, and prices will probably continue to go up. The bad news is that the supply chickens are finally coming home to roost on us, right? And that's going to exacerbate the affordability challenges. And then we have the kind of new structural effects where folks have more flexibility. There's going to be that incentive to out-migrate and all of those other headwinds for home ownership that our kind of clients have always been grappling with. Of course, that's without even talking about all the changes on the industry side, whether it be from portals, from iBuyers, from this kind of scuffle that NAR is having with the Department of Justice or what have you. All of it has kind of led to this rising tide only lifting some boats. And so for me, this is kind of the moral of the story, or maybe this is me and that was you, or potentially that could be you and your agents when it comes to what the message is for how to approach 2022. So we're optimistic, but I think if you do that, the tide is rising, and 2022 can kind of be the best year ever. You just want to make sure that all your folks keep their foot on that accelerator. So I will leave it there. I thank you so much for your time. If I haven't already beat you into submission and you have questions, I'm happy to try and address those too. And again, thanks to Doug and Neil and everybody for letting me be here today.
Thank you, Jordan. Thank you very much. Jody, do we have any, if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A. Jody, do we have anything in the chat?
There was one earlier about putting the house on the market during the holidays or waiting till the new year, if you've got your crystal ball.
Yeah, I mean, there's something to be said for being one of the only homes on the market. It's crazy. If you actually look at active listings by zip code, and you look at like by bedroom size, I did a calculation which just said like, how many active listings are there? 1-bedroom listings, 2-bedroom listings, 3-bedroom listings, zip code by zip code. And then I averaged that up, and it was crazy. Like the average number of listings in each kind of class of property in each zip code. And, zip codes vary dramatically in terms of size. Some are humongous, some are tiny, but, it was like 4 or 5, in any given zip code, there's like, 5 or 6 listing 1-bedroom, 5 or 6 2-bedrooms. And so, prices aren't typically at their apex in December. But, there's also that same decline in supply normally that we also see in demand, which means that, for folks who do want to buy, you're the only game in town. So those sell side stats, whether it's days on market, percent closing above ask, or what have you, are still pretty favorable. I'm also optimistic that prices are going up. So they'll probably get more money. The longer you wait, the more money you're going to get ultimately. But I don't think it's particularly problematic to sell your house in a 3% rate environment where prices are going up so fast.
Okay. There's another question in the chat, and also feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question as well. There's another one. From your experience, employment in the Bay Area, consistent or are employers moving out?
It's funny. I love this question. Thank you for the question. Employment is growing in the Bay Area and Southern California. It's growing faster than it is in other parts of the state. And so, there's still definitely an economic advantage to being located next to other, innovative companies and network effects and all of that stuff from being in the kind of hub of activity. Companies moving out of California is kind of a misnomer. Actually, you don't actually see a lot of companies fully pick up and leave California. What they do is they sometimes do their growing elsewhere, right? That they don't abandon San Francisco headquarters and things like that, but they might open up a second headquarters, right? That they in some ways follow their workforce. And that's why you see things like HQ2 springing up or operations being established in Tennessee. You do see some marquee things like, you saw when Toyota picked up and left the South Bay and went to Tennessee and what have you. But, in general, it's that the companies do their growing elsewhere. And that's not to kind of downplay the significance of your question, because I think that there are forces that make us less competitive, right? But for me, it's a symptom of the supply issue, and that's why I appreciate the question as well, because it gives me another chance to bring everything back around to supply, because this is really a symptom of this deeper structural problem. The reason why companies are growing outside of California, even if they're not picking up and leaving completely is because they can afford to pay workers a salary that equates to a high quality of life, right? And we have really put companies up against it. We've been making noise about this and complaining about this for years as real estate professionals because it limits the number of transactions. And I showed you how we're still only doing 400,000 home sales a year, which is how many we used to do in the mid 1980s, even though there's all these extra people here. That's, because of supply. So that affects us. And but for $830,000 home prices, the realtor income numbers would be even worse than that. But it's also kind of choking off our economic growth, because even if a company goes to the absolute max of their range for any given job, it still doesn't translate into a high quality of life, right? And this is what we call anecdata, right? But my niece graduated with a degree in computer science. This was a couple years ago. And she got a job offer in San Francisco making $100,000 a year. She'd only ever had like a $10, $15 an hour internship before. So this was like 21-year-old kid, $100,000 a year. She turned that job down and took an $80,000 a year job in Denver, Colorado, because guess what? In Denver, for $2,000 a month, she got her own 2-bedroom apartment and could afford to also have a car payment. And so she had a house and a car and no roommates, where she could have had a 6-figure income, but she would have been sharing a $5,000 a month apartment with 3 buddies from school just to be able to say that she made 6 figures. And so, no, we don't necessarily see companies completely abandoning California, but we're kidding ourselves if we don't think that this supply issue is going to have much more profound impacts than just how much money realtors are making out there. If we want to be the top 5 fastest growing economy, the way that we have been for the last 20 or 30 years, we're going to need to get serious about this, especially now that workers can take their, they don't have to live in Santa Clara to have that 6-figure income job anymore, right? And so I think it's, again, even more urgent than ever before that we start to tackle this issue.
I guess it makes me happy that also these recent college grads are thinking about things like that and not just chasing 6 figures.
It is good from the standpoint of, the kind of the stereotype of millennials, right? But it's also scary because they're thinking about it and they're doing that cost benefit. And that's that giant sucking sound that you're hearing pull people out to Texas, Nevada, and Arizona. They're not living in Phoenix because it's, such a great place to live. It's because you can have a 5-bedroom house with a pool, and be able to afford to go to Hawaii twice a year and stuff like that. And so, again, we got to get it sorted out.
Yep. Does anybody else have any other questions for Jordan?
The other thing I'll say, and hopefully this resonates with some of the folks in this room, but we have all these amazing universities, right? And so we're pumping all this money into training all these killer workers to have the best workforce, so that Phoenix can have the most talented workforce in the nation, right? So all these other states are laughing all the way to the bank, literally at our expense, right? Because we're the ones paying for the Stanfords and the UCs and all of that stuff. And so
we'll educate them and then give them to the other states. How nice of us.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Steve and Debbie Bianchi have a question.
Great. Oh, Steve, you're on mute.
Jody, can you?
Oh, there I go.
There he goes.
Yeah. We're having some internet problems today. Really interesting, Jordan. But if I heard you right, and I think I have, 400,000 sales per year in the state of California way back in 1980, and pretty much relatively the same amount in 2021. But then I think I saw a chart that showed the amount of new agents in 2021 versus 1980. I would have to think that there's a lot of agents aren't making any money at all.
100%. Yeah.
And then I've seen this happen in my career where all of a sudden that'll get thinned out with agents. I mean, what do you think might happen with something like that?
Yeah. So the productivity number has been going down for a long time, even before this. And if you look at our member survey, the percent that say they do no transactions at all is like 35%. If you actually log into the MLSs and look, like, the percent that have no listings and haven't been listed as a buyer's agent is also probably even north of that, somewhere in the 40 to 50% range. And that does so there's a churn component, right? That new agents come in, other ones leave. People come in, have no success and leave, but people look at the aggregated statistics, and with the housing market outperforming, a lot of people got, laid off in other sectors and said, hey, we got, the housing market's booming. I'm going to become a mortgage broker. I'm going to become a realtor. Right. And so it's like, and it takes about, 3 to 4 years for people to come in, realize they're striking out, get fed up, and then, go look for other work. And so that's why if you look at our forecast on the membership side, there's always a 2-year lag on transactions. We have sales peak and then start going down. People don't wake up and smell the coffee and quit and go find a different job for a couple of years, right? And so I think that, it's that lure. And like I said, with $830,000 median prices, those, we kind of jokingly refer to them as DNA sales, right? That people get in and are like, oh, I'm going to sell my brother's house. I'm going to sell my uncle's house, right? And then you realize like, oh my gosh, I got to like actually work to get all these listings. But for some people, you sell one $950,000 house and you know what I mean? You can kind of coast for a while and it justifies keeping that membership or, that license alive and doing the CE, especially since CAR gives you the free CE and stuff. You just find that a lot of people just like, just keep those licenses going.
Yeah. Well, funny thing is we had an open house in an area in San Mateo County a couple of weeks ago. And, a lot of elderly couples like we are walking by and I got one couple looked and said, what you two do has got to be the easiest thing in the world. My wife and I just retired and you know what, we're going to get a real estate license, put a sign on the house and we're going to sell it. And I just smiled and, I kept my mouth shut and I just think, 40 years I've been doing this and there's nothing easy about it. And you just got to work. I mean, it's
absolutely no. I love, that's why I love working for the realtors, just like on a personal, note. My dad was, didn't even graduate high school, but he worked at the parts department at the Chevy dealership in San Diego where I grew up. And, he bought his own home and the guy he bought the home from said, man, you'd make a great realtor. You're like and he got into real estate and he knows to the grindstone. He had just the grit and tenacity and saw the value of home ownership. And that's like why I'm here doing this speech today. It wasn't because he was a rocket scientist, economist with all these PhD connections and stuff. It was like he owned his own home and that provided the stability. So I could just like focus on going to school and getting good grades in math and stuff like that. And like, that's why even as I joke that it takes 2 years for folks to kind of wake up and smell the coffee, like, realtors are the kind of last bastion of entrepreneurism, and you really like you eat what you kill and that's it. Right. And so like it's a joy to work for folks because they're optimistic about getting that transaction and the folks that are really successful find success by also like making an incredible difference like in people's lives. And I don't know if anybody's ever heard Joel Singer's personal story about, what I mean, but that's what it's all about, is that you get folks into home ownership and you create more Ira Levines, which leads to more Jordan Levines that do, nerdy PowerPoint presentations and have kids that are going to probably have the, lives that like my dad would have never even dreamed of. So it's a win-win-win for everybody, I think.
Thank you, Jordan.
All right.
Awesome.
Do we have anybody else, Jody?
Let's see. James just says retailers just don't pay a viable or a livable wage for any reasonable first-time home buyer, which is chronic in the Bay Area.
Yeah, totally. No, and I think, there's kind of, people always ask me about the jobs numbers, and that's kind of what this question reminds me of, is like, are we creating good jobs or are we creating bad jobs? And for me, there is no such thing as a bad job. There's jobs that are, relative to your level of skills that you bring, right? And so for me, it's more about having the ladder of opportunity open because, when my dad worked at the Chevy dealership in the parts department at the kind of parts counter, that wasn't a bad job for him. He was a high school dropout. He knew about cars. That was a good job for him at that time relative to the skills. What's critical is that we provide opportunities for guys like that to have pathways into higher income sectors, right? That there's a kind of ladder of opportunity. We're not going to have the kind of very entry level jobs forming the bulk of first-time home buyers, but we can make sure that there's opportunities for those folks to get education, to go in some of these higher wage sectors that it ultimately, if we make home ownership affordable for the middle class and we focus on how to make sure that people go from entry level into middle class, and I think that's the kind of recipe for success.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jordan, and thank you for diving a little deeper into our local area. We appreciate that. And we do have the slides available. I think Jody has that posted in the chat. So thanks again, Jordan. Appreciate having you and all the great information you've shared with us today.
I'm actually gonna email everybody the slides from Jordan, and can I include your contact information?
Yep, and they're right there on the last slide too. In case you forget, then you can always just email me. I work for you, so if I can help you make more money or help your agents be more successful, I'm happy to do that.
Awesome. We'll get that out to everybody after. And don't log off just yet. We have some more great information coming for you guys.
Thank you. I'll see you on the next one.
All right,
Thanks, Jordan.
All right, next up, we've got our Government Affairs Director and my cat. Our Government Affairs Director, Tim Beaubien, who's going to talk a little bit on SB 9 and SB 10, but hopefully more importantly, he's going to touch on two very important topics or issues that we're dealing with within San Jose, and that is the COPA program and the opportunity housing. So Tim, I'll turn this over to you to go ahead and enlighten everyone on what's going on in the government affairs arena.
Thank you. And I don't know if I can top that great presentation from Jordan or a surprise visit from some of our pets, but I will do my best, and let me share my screen real quick and we will get into our advocacy update. So as Doug mentioned, first, I'm going to give a little bit of background on two state bills that just passed and were signed into law that give some background on a local San Jose policy called opportunity housing that we're going to talk about, and then a second policy called COPA. So Senate Bill 9 was something that was signed into law earlier this year. It's going to take effect on January 1st, 2022. And it follows the concept that has been popular in California and nationwide recently, which is residential upzoning. And SB 9 is going to allow for the ministerial approval of a lot split or a duplex on single-family residential zoning statewide. One thing to note is that previously you were allowed up to 3 units ministerially with an ADU and a junior ADU on a single family lot statewide. This is only going to add one more through the lot split and duplex process. You're only allowed a maximum of 4 units on what was originally a single family parcel. The duplex conversion has a lot of different restrictions. You're not able to turn an existing single family home into a duplex if it has been rented within the past 3 years. It falls under any sort of state or local rent control law or any other price control, such as a deed restricted affordability issue, or it has gone under an Ellis Act eviction under the last 15 years, which is removing a rental property from the market entirely. And it also makes it very difficult to destroy more than 25% of the existing exterior structure in most cases, so that really you're needing to convert the existing single family home into a duplex, not tearing down and building from scratch. If you want to do a lot split, the lot split must be a minimum of 60-40. You can't split it 90% and then take a 10% super small parcel. All of the local design guidelines and setbacks must be followed. Some other main restrictions are anything that's a historic landmark or a district, a wetland, a farmland, or a protected high flood or high fire risk is all exempted from the SB 9 process. And a local agency can also require 1 additional parking spot if it is not near a transit hub, I believe within a quarter mile. And there's no short-term rentals. This is something that has been relatively controversial throughout the state. It is something that CAR did support, and they are still proud of that support position. And that is because of the opportunity to create more entry-level home ownership. Why this is different than building an ADU is an ADU is great. It's helping maybe a family member stay nearby. It's providing kind of a naturally affordable rental housing. But SB9 is allowing us to create some more naturally affordable ownership housing. So now maybe instead of building an ADU in your backyard for your children, you can actually split that lot and now they can build their own single family home. As Jordan was talking about, we can start to build that generational wealth for our future, which is so important. The other state bill that also follows a similar sort of upzoning policy is Senate Bill 10, which was also signed into law this year and will take effect on January 1st. It operates a little bit differently than SB 9. It would allow up to 10 units to be built on a residential parcel, but it has to be within a transit-rich area or an urban infill site. And it also does not remove local control the way SB 9 was. All SB 10 does is it is opening the door for local jurisdictions to enact an ordinance to allow a streamlined passage of these type of 10-unit parcels if they would like. So it's not a ministerial approval, which is kind of a policy long-term, but it just would streamline the zoning and the CEQA process to make it a little bit simpler. Unlike SB 9, there is no ownership requirements. That's one thing I forgot to mention about SB 9 in the last slide, is that if you plan on doing the lot split, you need to owner occupy for at least 3 years after you do it. That was a main CAR amendment that they wanted to include in the policy to prevent your large REITs and LLCs from coming in, buying up single family homes and turning them into rental apartment units, which is not what we want to see. We do not want to see a net loss of ownership opportunities. We want to be increasing entry-level ownership opportunities. Again, SB 10, you need to follow a lot of the local design guidelines and setbacks, and there's the same sort of exemptions: high flood or fire zones, open space, park, or recreational lands approved by voters, similarly as protected Coyote Valley. So that brings us to the state background of something that the city of San Jose is exploring, and a lot of other jurisdictions in the Bay Area are exploring as well. So if you operate in a brokerage outside of San Jose, it is likely that a policy like this could be coming to the city that you are based out of as well. And the concept of opportunity housing is going a little bit of a step further past SB 9, which is to allow up to 4 units per parcel on residential properties that have a residential neighborhood land use designation while maintaining the zoning setbacks, the height requirements, and design guidelines. This is something that the city of San Jose has been looking at for a long time. The original timeline, the general plan task force was approved for staff to review next steps and possibly come forward with a couple of draft proposals for the city council to vote on to further study. So council is going to vote on some policy direction later this fall. Whatever policy direction is approved, staff is going to go back to work on an official ordinance, and that ordinance will come back to council sometime late in 2022, maybe even early 2023. While the city of San Jose was originally exploring opportunity housing within transit corridors, very similarly to how SB 10 operates, there was direction from the general plan task force to at least have staff start to explore studying it citywide to see what the ramifications and impact would be. Some other jurisdictions that have explored and actually passed this is Oregon allowed statewide upzoning of up to a triplex on any parcel in 2019. Minneapolis has allowed citywide upzoning of up to a fourplex on a single family parcel in 2018. And the city of Berkeley and city of Sacramento have both approved the study of upzoning similarly to what San Jose is doing right now. And there's a lot of other California cities. I'm hearing of this popping up in the greater LA area a lot as well. So SCORE recently did just come out with our official position on opportunity housing, which was a lengthy discussion through our local government relations committee, and the position was eventually ratified by our board of directors. And that is that we support the city of San Jose going back to an opportunity housing proposal that is within transit corridors only. We feel that with the passage of SB 9 and SB 10 being signed into law, that it's unnecessary to have opportunity housing citywide. We want to see how SB 9 citywide will work in conjunction with an opportunity housing proposal within transit that creates a smart growth upzoning approach that's going to increase affordability and supply in both the rental and ownership without really disrupting our neighborhood look and feel and that quality of life that our suburban neighborhoods rely on. So we have created a blog post and a resource page that has SCORE's press release on the issue. It has CAR's press release on SB 9 and SB 10. It has some information about the financial viability of opportunity housing and upzoning. We have some state information, some local information. I would really urge you to check out that blog post. There's a lot of great information in there. And CAR just released a legal FAQ on SB 9 because it's a very complex bill and the applicability of the policy is very dense and there's a lot of good legal information in there.
Hey, Tim, before you go on to COPA, I see Steve has a question regarding opportunity housing. So if we can just touch on that real quick before we jump into COPA.
Sure, we can take a couple of quick opportunity housing questions and then we'll jump into the COPA policy.
Steve? Steve, are you there? Okay, well, we'll go ahead and move on.
Oh, excuse me. This is
Yeah.
Joe Gourmet. I have a question.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Hold on, Joe. Go ahead, Steve. We'll get to you next, Joe.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm on my iPhone, not my iPad, so I'm not familiar with the format here. Yeah, I have a question about the policy on opportunity zoning. If it's geared into transportation corridors, I assume bus lines are part of those corridors. Now, who controls the creation of new bus lines?
I would assume that would be VTA.
Okay, so let's just say, a special interest group decides that they want to see a bus line go down a new corridor. Okay, and we're going to decide that, a street that didn't have a bus line at a certain point in time, now they want to see a new bus line go down that street. Does that mean that street now can be split up into having fourplexes and eightplexes and whatever else on that street? Because somebody decided they wanted to see an expansion of opportunity zone housing? In other words, have we got this giant tunnel that doesn't end with the sun at the end of it that we're supporting basically the expansion of opportunity zoning damn near anywhere in the city that somebody can decide is a transportation corridor?
Bus lines are included in what would be called a transit-rich corridor, but it does have to be a high-frequency bus line. And I don't remember what the number is off the top of my head, but it's several stops per hour. So
but that number can be changed by the VTA, right?
You couldn't park a random bus line in the middle of a residential neighborhood with one stop a day and have it be counted as a transit-rich corridor.
Yeah, that's what they said when a camel got its head stuck underneath the circus tent. Sorry, but I'm not involved with LGR anymore, but I'd like to point that out as possibly an error or something that had not been maybe considered that should have been.
And I guess I would be interested in seeing where the funding would come from and popping up bus lines all over the city, because I know VTA is cutting a lot of bus lines and quite frankly, they're not too fiscally solvent right now with flushed cash to be adding bus lines all over the city.
Yeah, well, the housing department wasn't funded real well for a rent registry either until they decided that the people that provide housing would fund it. Give me a break. They'll find the money if they want it.
Point taken, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you.
Joe?
Oh, yeah. Hi, Tim. Joe Gourmet. So I probably already know the answer to this question because it's Los Gatos. We have a property in Los Gatos, and we've been fighting them for years. And I was wondering if the the 9 and the 10 SB laws can be used on a property that was never zoned residential. We've got it split into 4 lots. We want to split into 8, but Los Gatos has been fighting us for years, and it just doesn't make sense to do 4 lots. Can we use SB 9 or 10 to try to get them to budge? Because it seems like in Los Gatos, you have to sue them to get anywhere.
That's a pretty unique legal nuance, and I'm not going to pretend to be a lawyer. I wouldn't feel comfortable offering a recommendation one way or the other, but I would definitely reach out to CAR Legal. They have a free legal hotline and see what they would say on the issue.
Okay.
You may be able to utilize SB 9 on this.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you. Tim, let's go ahead and move on to COPA.
So another policy that the city of San Jose has been exploring for the past couple of years that we've been engaged in is what's called the City of San Jose COPA ordinance, Community Opportunity to Purchase Act. And this is being proposed as part of a larger 21-point anti-displacement policy that would allow nonprofits a greater opportunity at purchasing rental housing units and rental housing properties. It would allow a group of qualified nonprofits that are approved by the city that would be granted both the first right of offer and a first right of refusal on all rental properties. They were exploring single family homes all the way up to several hundred unit apartment complexes. And they just came out with their first round of draft recommendations that they're going to exclude single family homes, but the policy is going to encompass a duplex all the way up to a giant 1,000-unit apartment complex. The nonprofit would be given 15 days to declare interest in the first right of offer, and then an additional 25 days to submit a formal offer before the selling party is able to market it to the public. So you'd be looking at 40 days as a selling party before you can legally openly market a property that is a duplex or more anywhere in the city of San Jose. You do not have to accept the nonprofit offer. You are allowed to open it up to the market at that time. But then when you are ready to accept an open market offer, you do have to allow first right of refusal and the nonprofit to match that potential open market. And one major sticking point here that's concerning is whether it's going to be just a price for price match or whether you're going to have to meet terms and conditions. So if you have a $2 million open market offer, all cash on a duplex with no contingencies and a 15-day escrow, is the nonprofit going to be able to match that $2 million price tag, but they have FHA financing with 3 contingencies and a 60-day escrow, and you're still required to accept it. So there's a lot of potential repercussions of this. Obviously, it's a burden and a timeline delay on real estate transactions. It has potential 1031 exchange implications. We feel that it could adversely impact market price and demand in several ways. If you're a housing provider looking to purchase property in Santa Clara County, I certainly would look elsewhere before San Jose, where I'm not going to have to deal with this when I eventually want to sell that property, or my children may inherit it. And frankly, for our smaller brokerages and our out-of-town agents, if you run a brokerage out of San Jose, but you have a client doing business in San Jose, education is infeasible. And then as a result, the compliance and the enforcement concerns are a major liabilities for our brokerages and our mom and pop housing providers. So the timeline on this policy is it was approved through the anti-displacement proposal in the fall of 2020. We currently have several stakeholder groups that we are represented with multiple stakeholders on each group. It was supposed to be heard in the middle of October. So around this timeline, we've already delayed it until at least January 2021. And only San Francisco and DC in the nation currently have a policy like this in place. And it was recently just delayed in the city of Berkeley. So we've launched an opposition campaign to try to fight COPA. We've requested some funding from CAR and NAR to run a full-blown opposition campaign on this policy because it would be detrimental to our association. We are working with the Real Strategies NAR campaign consultant We have a website launching in early November, www.stopcopasanjose.com. So feel free to bookmark that for when it goes live. We're going to be working on targeted tear-off mailers to the public, targeted emails to all SCORE members and the public, patch-through phone calls to council members, targeted text messaging to all members in the public, and also a lot of paid social media and online ads. And then we're going to take all these paid resources and use them to create some lead capture generation in the community, to build up a grassroots army to continue to fan the flames of this opposition campaign into 2022. So a lot of you are probably wondering why I'm telling you all about our opposition campaign. You don't sit on LGR or the board, and this shouldn't be an issue to you. But I just want to let you know of the work we're doing on the opposition campaign, and the help that we need from all of you. You know, if you happen to receive a tear-off mailer or a call for action from us, please promote it throughout your office. Please respond to the call for action. It only takes about 15 seconds. And every voice that we can send to our elected officials in San Jose to hopefully defeat this helps. And it's one voice, it's one email, it's one call at a time, and every little bit helps. So that's the major opposition campaign on a really harmful policy in San Jose we're running. Just a couple of local advocacy updates before I take questions. Remember to get involved in all of our local advocacy efforts. Sign up for our NAR Realtor Party mobile alerts if you don't already. CAR call for actions through the same Realtor Party mobile alert platforms. Our SCORE calls for action who come through our MailChimp emails to all of our members. If you don't sign up for the government affairs newsletter from SCORE already, it goes out every other Friday. We put all this sorts of information in it. If you are interested in serving on a committee, you know, LCRC, LGR, we always need more voices on those two committees, and follow on our social channels. Lastly, because I know I'm running out of time and I need to leave our CEO a couple of minutes, all of this is possible with our Realtor Action Fund. It goes so much towards promoting candidates that we endorse that are fighting for Realtor Party issues. It was what deemed real estate essential in 2020 during COVID. We have our different fundraising levels here. And I implore all of you to try to join as a major donor to help support our Realtor Action Fund. We have our first ever major donor recognition event coming up next month. We're going to be holding a buffet lunch with an open bar at the San Jose Capitol Club Thursday, November 18th, with keynote elected official speakers who are going to be running for office, a SCORE past president, a couple of mayoral candidates in the city of San Jose. It's going to be a great event. We want to thank all of our major donors. And if you're not already, it's not too late to enjoy that great event. So thank you for hearing my presentation. I know we're short on time, so I don't know if we want to take any quick COPA questions. If we don't have time, I'll put my contact info in the chat, and please feel free to reach out.
Yeah, I don't see any hands up currently.
I actually have one question if you have time. If not, that's okay.
Go ahead, Joe.
So a question for you. What happens when the Marcus and Millichap boys, they sell a lot of apartments, as you all guys all know, and sometimes their sales never hit the market because they're not part of NAR Core or MLS. And you know, they'll sell a 100-unit apartment building, never goes on the market. Can the city stop that? Because there's no real control after it's sold.
And so that's what the city wants to do with COPA, is they want to force, you know, your Marcus and Millichaps and your larger LLCs to market these properties to a qualified group of nonprofits to kind of prevent those off-market deals. But really what it's going to impact, because let's face it, a nonprofit is never going to be able to afford a 500-unit apartment complex. It's going to impact your small mom and pops who own a fourplex, you know, want a 1031 exchange, or just want to get.
Oh, I see. That's a good distinction. Thank you.
Impacted by this, not Marcus.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
Just to comment on that, you know, a lot, their focus is to go all the way down to, you know, 2 units plus, but there really is an opportunity for these nonprofits to purchase, to, you know, if they were to just hire a qualified, competent real estate broker to represent them, there are opportunities for them to purchase in the open market, just like anybody else. So we don't feel that it's necessary that that we force these homeowner or these property owners to have to offer it out when there is opportunity for these nonprofits to purchase in a traditional manner. They feel that they're missing out on these good opportunities because they're being sold off market, but that's really not the case. There's plenty of opportunity out there for them to purchase properties in the open market. And the best way to do that is to have a good, qualified, competent real estate agent or real estate broker representing them who can advocate and negotiate on their behalf.
All right, thank you.
Steve?
Yeah, what this is, it gives somebody a right to a legal option. Okay, it establishes a law that gives nonprofits selectively an option on any kind of real estate they decide that they want to enter into above and beyond a negotiated contract. An option is, if it's unpaid for, is the seizure of a property right, because the owner of a piece of property has the right to compensation when there's an action taken that takes away one of his rights. And one of those property rights is the right to sell an option. So it seems to me very simple that the way to get around this is to simply talk to the city and say, if you're going to do this, we want compensation for the property owner that's involved. And if you're going to do it without offering some kind of compensation that's negotiated, we're going to sue you. It's unconstitutional. It's that simple. So why aren't we taking that position?
Because I know we're over time. I am working with the Pacific Legal Foundation, who specializes in private property rights litigation, to see what their thoughts are on, COPA and San Jose and what, legal recourse there would be.
Well, the Legal Action Fund of CAR, and particularly with the NAR meetings coming up, I think that ought to be brought up at the meetings that we're going to have in San Diego, for crying out loud, because that's huge. And the way to stop this is just to shove it back down their damn throats. And do that, because ultimately it's going to wind up going there anyway. So do it now instead of wasting all this time on it. It's very simple.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Tim. Thanks for your update. And now we'll move on to Neil Collins to give us a quick update on what's going on at SCORE.
All right, we're going to go ahead and run through this pretty fast. I do want to thank Tim and the whole advocacy team. We've been engaged with COPA for over 2 years now, and Opportunity Housing for the better part of a year. So these are long timelines. Okay, Jody, you're going to be advancing my slides. There we go. Perfect. So I want to let you all know we have some leadership opportunities available for the foundation. We are looking for good quality people for that organization. The foundation's our charitable 501c3 arm. We are looking for officers and directors and encourage you to apply. We will get the links in the chat and then in the follow-up emails on all this stuff. We're also starting to get nominations for our award selection. So this is really Realtor of the Year and Affiliate of the Year. So please look for your newsletter this afternoon, and you'll have an opportunity to go ahead and nominate someone. And please do. A lot of times everyone thinks someone else is going to nominate, or why isn't so-and-so been chosen over the years? It's because no one nominated them. In order to be part of the party and considered, they have to be nominated. So please take the 5 minutes or so to make that nomination. Very, very critical. It's a prestigious award. You can only win it once. So I implore you to take some time out of your schedule and recognize some of your business confidence out there. Code of Ethics, cycle 6 is due on December 31st. So every 3 years, you need to take a Code of Ethics. If you are not sure whether it's required or not, please reach out to us for your specific situation. If you do not complete the cycle, unfortunately, we'll need to suspend you until you're able to fulfill that NAR requirement. You already heard about Tim's NAR contribution appreciation luncheon, so I won't go into that. Really important, those who still have the Express Key. The Express Key is kind of a standalone device. It's not your cell phone with the app on it. It's a standalone device. Those are going to get retired at the end of this year, specifically December 1st. Many of the cellular networks are retiring the old 3G networks, which the Express Key works on, and we're moving towards a 5G environment. So that technology is no longer going to be viable. So please come in. Our membership team will help you with that transition. And I think you'll be really pleased with the app on the phone. That they've done a lot of great work there. Next slide. We have our annual pumpkin auction next Wednesday, and we're doing it here at SCORE. Traditionally, we do this at BJ's as part of our CBVA meeting, but with the pandemic and all this other kind of stuff going on, we decided, hey, we're going to do it outside, just like we do our barbecue out in the courtyard. And we invite you all to come. We'll have a coffee cart. We're going to have breakfast treats. It's going to be a great event, and it all benefits the kids. So all the contributions for this goes to a school that desperately needs them, that we've been participating with for several years. Catherine R. Smith, at one time, one of the poorest schools in the entire school district. They've just done amazing things, and they've been a great partner with us over the year. We have some classes coming up. We'll put some links in there on business planning, probate certificates, transaction coordinator. And then here's big news. President Doug has just decided to, we're going to give our best shot on December 8th to do a big member appreciation holiday party blowout fundraiser at the DoubleTree. And I say we'll try because, again, we don't know where things are progressing with health orders and so forth. But as of this moment, that is our goal. And it's going to be a fantastic event. Jody and her team's been working on this nonstop over the last several days. There's going to be great food, great times. You get to see all your friends. We're going to raise a little bit of money for CAFPA, which is the organization that helps foster parents. It's very difficult to foster a child, and this is the organization that helps and supports them. And specifically, we have a couple components. We have the toy drive that helps provide a wonderful Christmas for these folks, but we also have a cash component too, where people contribute cash and they can use that throughout the year. I've volunteered on the days when these parents come in and essentially do their Christmas shopping for their foster children, and it's a really cool event. And then our last winter general membership meeting is going to be on Wednesday, December 15th. And we are going to have Joel Singer as our featured speaker. And then we're going to have current CAR president and past president of SCORE, Dave Walsh, also as a moderator there. And so Joel's going to give kind of his last forward-looking thoughts on what 2022 is going to be. He is retiring this year. And then Dave's going to kind of do almost like a reflective exit interview and just talk about Joel's 42 years and some key takeaways. So it's going to be a pretty special event, and we hope you all can attend. And thank you everyone for staying through the end. I know we went a few minutes over it. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thanks for attending.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
Doug, Neil, Jody, thank you.
Have a great one.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye.